the DAWbench Radio Show, the official podcast of DAWbench.com.
Welcome to the DAWbench Radio Show. I am your host, Curigliano of AAVIM Technology in Melbourne, Australia. And I am joined again today, co-hosting by Erin McKimm, who's also in Melbourne. How you going, Erin?
I'm good, thanks, Vin. Good morning. Nice and early morning here in Melbourne.
Good morning. Yes, 5:30 in the morning in winter. That's fantastic. Now, we are actually missing Pete today. Unfortunately, Pete's been doing quite a bit of travelling the last couple of weeks at conferences and such, and he hasn't pulled up well. So for Pete to miss a show, Erin, is pretty rare. And I just went back and had a look at the history there. And his first appearance on the show was episode 6, right? But he was just a special guest then. And then episode 7, you and I did together. And then from episode 8 to 29, he has been front row and centre. So for Pete to miss this show is pretty rare. And I'm going to just send out some energy for Pete to get well soon. I mean, it's not anything major. I just think he's just, come up with a typical travel lurgy, He's run down. And
yeah, it's unfortunate.
Yeah, but it's okay. So we'll carry his energy for him. And I know he'll be disappointed with this because, he's he's a huge synth head. So I know he was looking forward to it. So we'll just carry his spirit with him. And, so Pete, get well. And we'll catch you on the next one. Now, we have a special guest today, and that is Peter Volaender, a.k.a. Dawesome, who is the founder and lead developer at Dawesome Music, who develops some of the most unique, innovative, and inspirational virtual instruments and effects processors on the market. Peter is known for constantly pushing the boundaries with his synth and effects designs and is a true innovator in the area of modern synthesis methods. Welcome, Peter.
Hey, hello.
How you going, mate?
Yeah, all fine. Thank you. So I'm here at 9:30 in Germany in the summer.
Yeah, well, lucky you.
Sounds nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, just quickly, and this is kind of a bit of a tradition of how I start the show, I'll just give you a quick overview of how I became aware of your products. Now, I do kind of believe in a bit of synchronicity. So, we're only probably going back maybe a month ago, maybe a couple of months ago. I was weighing up getting some new guests on the show, and I remember in my news timeline, I was seeing Traction Waveform 13 kept popping up, right? I'm thinking, oh yeah, and I hadn't really paid any attention to Traction for probably over a decade more, and at the same time, I was chatting to Erin, who was saying, he goes, hey, I've got this interesting project on at the moment where I'm doing some patch programming for a synth developer in Germany called Dawesome. And I went, and I went to, I remember I was on the Traction site and I saw some of your synths listed, but I didn't pay too much attention. And literally, probably the same day, I'm talking to Erin and he's saying, well, I'm working on this stuff. And I went to the Dawesome website and it sent me back to Traction. I went, hang on, this is all syncing up nicely. So, I reached out and I decided to get both Jules, who was on the last show and who's the founder and lead developer over at Traction, and yourself. So you've completed the circle, Peter. So again, welcome. This is going to be awesome. It's going to be Dawesome. Sorry. I'm really looking forward to this. Some of the synth designs have just blown me away, and I was familiarizing myself yesterday just to get a nice, angle on what the synths were doing. Mm-hmm. And I was mentioning to Erin, I said there were several what the fuck moments here, because I'm like going, what the fuck? It's some of the stuff that it was just not out of left field, but it's just so innovative the way that the sound creation and the modulation and stuff that you've implemented in these synth designs, which are so different to the vast majority of synths that I've seen, actually, of any of the synths that I've seen. So this is going to be, a deep dive into your approach to those synthesis methods. But I think a great way to start would be to give us your personal history with music, computers, and coding, and your eventual journey to starting Dawesome Music and your ongoing role there.
Yeah, I can do it. It may be a little bit of a long story.
That's okay. Take as long as you like.
Yeah, very interested to hear.
Yeah, I think with music, it was always there. So I remember I was maybe 2 years old or 2.5 years old, and I was already fascinated by music. And I realized that we had all these cups and stuff in the kitchen. So in the middle of the night, I went up and started inventing, at least this is what I thought, a drum set. And my parents didn't like it because it was in the middle of the night.
Oh, they would have loved it.
Yeah, but
that's cool.
Yeah, and from there on, I think music was always a huge part of my life. And the same holds true for mathematics and technology. So that was the other thing that I was always fascinated with. So in my youth, I played a bit of a traditional instruments like the trombone and flugelhorn and the recorder. Mm-hmm. But I always had an eye on the piano. And so not knowing anything about it, I always wanted to have one. And my parents always said, yeah, you want a piano. And then we will get one and we will get you lessons. And after 3 weeks, you will say, no. And so that didn't work out. So I started to work in the summer vacations when I was, I think, 13 or 14. And by the end of 6 weeks working in a factory, I got my first keyboard, which at least had a piano keyboard. And so that was the first step in that direction. And that was already quite fascinating because I realized that you can also do all kinds of sounds with it, not only that piano thing, and that there's not only melodies and chords, but that there's another dimension, which is all about sound and how sound evolves. And that got me into synthesizers. And at the same time, it was in the 80s, there was a lot of music popular like Kraftwerk, Depeche Mode and stuff like that.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. And at the same time, I also realized that there are computers, and I had a teacher who helped me with the very first steps of programming. And then I learned everything about it that I tried to get every book. I went to those exhibitions and went to all these companies and were getting on their nerves as long as I had to, so that they gave me some tricks or whatever. And that was quite fascinating. And it's still nowadays it is fascinating for me that you can write something like a short text, and then there's a machine and it simply does all these steps, and it does it in a very short time. And it's simply amazing. It gives you so much power, and you start with an idea and then you can turn it into reality. That's I think what fascinates me so much about it.
Yeah. Can you remember what computer was it that you started on in the 80s?
Yes, I started on a VC20 from Commodore. That was the one that we had in school.
Yes.
And then the first one that I got was an Atari 600.
Right.
So an 8-bit computer. And I started with basic programming, but in order to do that cool stuff like doing games and doing some music engine on it and something like a tracker app on the Atari, I had to learn that assembler and machine code.
Yes. And did you move to the 1040 STE from there?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Right.
And when I moved to the 1040, 1024,
There was a 520 and there was a 1040.
1040.
Yes.
Yeah. So I had that basic one, and I had Cubase on it, and that very early version. And at that time, that was quite fascinating. I had a few synthesizers, and before I had these hardware sequencers, which were really tedious to program. And
Yes.
then suddenly you had all that freedom to do it on your screen, to move things right, left, and arrange things in an intuitive way. This was really a game changer. And so I started to create my own Cubase thing, like coding my first MIDI DAW, something like that on the Atari, just to learn about how does it work. And I also got a Yamaha sampler, a TX16V.
Yes.
I think it's one of the worst samplers
Yeah.
by any standards.
I concur.
But
It wasn't very good. Yep. Correct. Yep.
yeah, it was very expensive, but I got a used one. It was not too expensive, the only one that I could afford. And it had one really cool feature, and that is you could, via MIDI, sysx messages, you could fill the, you could transfer samples.
Right.
And this is where I started to make my own, where I started to code my own synthesizer. And instead of creating the engine, I just created something that creates that samples and then transferred it to the TX16V so that I then can play it on a keyboard. So that computations that I needed to create these samples were not possible in real time, not on the computers that I had back then. But that principle was working, and so I could do my first experiments of creating sounds by computing them.
Yeah, and that would have been early 90s.
I think that was either very early 90s or very late 80s, somewhere around that time.
Yeah, there was not a lot of computing power to run anything in real time at that point. Yeah, of course.
Especially not on my budget.
Not on anyone's budget, I don't think.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Erin, did you have an Atari as well?
My dad had one.
Your dad one. Oh, sorry, because you're a bit younger than us. There you go.
Yeah, so he had it, and he had a few Roland modules hooked up to it to compose orchestral music. But I used to get on there and just try and write really bad electronic music.
Yeah, and I can concur with Peter about how horrible the hardware sequences were back in the day, and how much of a game changer it was for Cubase on Atari, because I've voiced that multiple times on the podcast. That was just like an absolute paradigm shift for me. So yeah, I understand exactly where Peter's coming from there. But there you go.
So to just give an example, that sequencer that I had worked before, it had a 2-digit display. That was everything.
2-digit, wow.
2 digits, two red digits.
That's hard work.
Yeah, and then, of course, you could still create an entire track, but it was a horrible amount of work, and you need to make a lot of drawings on paper just to keep everything together. And then if you do only one hit, you always had to do that menu diving, and if you did one hit on the wrong place, you could erase everything. There was no safety net, no nothing. That was really hard.
Yeah. That reminds me of doing sampling and looping on a Ensoniq Mirage, because that had a 2-digit display as well. Yeah. It's like, I don't know how we did it, Peter, but we did.
Yeah, we did.
Somehow, yeah.
On the other hand, the other way how we did it back then was with a 4-track tape recorder.
Yes.
So where you just had to play everything live. So we had a sketch on paper how we want to do it, and then we played the first tracks, recorded them, then we did the next ones, and then you could always merge two, put it to the next. And when you did that, let's say 3 or 4 times, then the quality was degrading. That was one limitation. And the other one is...
That's an understatement.
It gives you so much excitement if you play the final run of that track, because if you miss it, you can start from the beginning again.
Yeah.
And sometimes nowadays, it is so easy. You can have millions of undos, and that kind of excitement gets a little bit lost. And I think this is why many musicians also feel they want to do these kind of live shows where not everything is planned and where you're really in the moment, because this gives you back that kind of excitement that you have.
Yeah.
Oh, for sure.
You're diving into, well, the unknown. Not the unknown, but, there was always the variable of something was going to go wrong, and you had to actually commit on that first take. And it's very, very different. And those good old Tascam 4-track recorders, wow, yeah.
Yeah. But sometimes it was also kind of, lovely surprises. Like you did a take and you did something wrong, but you said, well, but should we start again? No, let's deal with it. Let's make something from it.
Yep.
And then suddenly something which was a mistake in the beginning evolved to something where in the end it became a critical part of what you were doing. And so it can also have its nice moments.
Yeah, the happy accidents.
Exactly, as a happy accident.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Perfect.
Yeah.
All right. Sorry, I got you sidetracked there. So, where were we up to? You were doing some of your own programming on the Atari. Yeah.
Yeah, on the Atari, and then to send this sysx messages to the Yamaha samplers, so that like a predecessor of virtual instruments. At that time, I thought it's impossible to ever make money with something as obscure as this. So I even hadn't the idea that this could be something serious. This was just me playing with what is possible and what can you do. I studied mathematics, and I actually enjoyed that time very much. Mathematics was, especially at the university, was kind of a philosophical eye-opener to me. When you study mathematics for a couple of years, it transforms your brain. The way how you look to the world, to the universe, to everything simply changes. You can't be a mathematician and stick to your old perspective. And that was quite nice. And there were quite many interesting people. And so the worst thing I thought that could happen to me is that I find a job and will have a 9-to-5 office thingy.
Right.
So I thought, okay, how can I prolong that time? And then I found a professor who was happy to give me a 4 years contract so that I can make a PhD. And I think I got paid full time, but I had to put only something like 10 hours per week. And
oh, wow.
Oh, okay.
That's a good deal.
So to do my obligations, and the rest was to do my research. But I had my PhD thesis already finished before I even started that 4 years. So that gave me 4 years to do everything I always wanted to do.
Amazing.
Yeah. And back then I found it quite fascinating with AI technology. And I thought, well, right now we're in the 90s. There's so much computing power. There's so much data available. And the time is ready to go full into AI, because companies can make so much with AI. So,
but we're talking mid to late 90s.
Yeah, exactly.
And you're already diving into AI.
Yes.
Okay, we will be discussing that a little bit little bit further. Okay, sorry. Yeah, continue on. Yep.
Yeah. No, so that was one thing that I really spent a lot of time. The other thing is, with the first money that I got from working at the university, I had saved enough to get a piano, a real acoustic piano. And I started to take lessons. Until then, everything that I ever did with keyboards was just self-taught. And but I thought it would be good to systematically learn how to play the piano. That was also quite nice. Because during this 4 years at the university, I had a lot of time to exercise and practice and learn. And yeah, so after university, I got sidetracked a little bit away from music. I had a startup. I think we can come back to that later, also with the AI topic. I had, afterwards, I worked in the field of navigation systems for cars, which was brand new hot topic back then.
Yeah, of course.
And so that was also quite fascinating. Even though I have no interest in cars, I thought it's good to have that navigation system.
Oh, you're breaking my heart here because I'm a car guy, but that's okay.
I think most people are car guys, but yeah, I wasn't.
Right.
I'm not really either.
So, but what I want to say is I slowly went into that kind of more or less normal jobs. And with all these normal jobs, there comes a lot of work, a lot of time, a lot of thinking. And music pushed a little bit into the back and was mainly me listening to music, practicing less. And that went for a couple of years. And I then had that nagging feeling something is missing in my life. But I couldn't really, I didn't really knew what it is. I just felt something is wrong. And so I tried a lot of things. I tried painting. I always loved painting. And also when I tried to do painting back then, I said, yeah, it's nice, but that was not what I was missing. I started writing. I always loved to write stories. That's still true, but it was also not that thing. And then one day I had the idea, instead of playing piano sheet music, like practicing a new piece by Chopin or whatever, I thought, oh, maybe in the past I wrote my own songs for that synthy band that I had in the late 80s and early 90s. Maybe I can just do some traditional piano music composition. And then it was like, bam, I did. And within a few hours, I realized, okay, the thing that I was missing in my life was this music creativity thing. And I had to go back to that. And it hit me like a thunderstruck, or something like that.
Yeah. You had an epiphany.
I had an epiphany, and normally it was, I'm easily getting excited by something, like a new topic, like can be astrobiology today, and it can be AI tomorrow, and it can be whatever the day after. And usually this is then for 2 or 3 years. I learn everything about it, and then I move to the next topic. But here I realized that's my thing. That's my thing. Period. And it is going to be my thing for my entire life. And how could I have missed that before? I don't know. And maybe I had changed over the years, but I had that epiphany, and then I made a master plan and said, okay, I don't know how I can integrate music to make it the center of my life, but I give me 10 years. I will start, because I was on composition, I will start to compose music at least 2 hours a day. So I went up every morning at 5 o'clock so that I can do 2 hours of composing, learning whatever I need to learn before the kids go up, before the busy day starts.
Sounds like us, Erin.
Yep, that's the way to do it. Nice and early.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. And then I had a look to how universities teach composition and arrangement and what they actually teach. I got hold of all the books. I got hold of a lot of books, how music composition and arrangement was taught in the 17th, 18th, and 19th century, because I think there's really a lot of great material which is still valid nowadays and which sometimes is very much superior to what you get if you go just to a normal bookstore and get to those books which are from today. And for some time, I thought, yeah, maybe composition is that thing. But at the same time, I felt, well, but if I do 100% this music composition thing, the other part with the mathematics, I'm going to miss that. How can I combine these two things? And I had no answer to it. I just realized that, for example, I wasn't happy with harmony theory. And I thought, well, if there is a good theory of harmony, it should not contradict anything that we know about how our brain operates. And it should be able to explain also things like jazz music. It should be able to explain all kinds of music. It should not be constrained to explain 19th century music. And so I started to learn everything about how our brain processes music, and created my own harmony theory, which I believe is capable of explaining how jazz works and how the 19th century music works and how this is different. And actually, it's a very simple theory. It's much simpler than the Riemann theory, for example.
Have you actually published that, Peter?
No. No, I don't have. But recently, so the one thing which I think is important is the following. If I'm allowed to make that excursion, and you're not saying yes, so
yes, of course,
absolutely, yeah,
of course.
Fascinating.
Yeah. Okay, so normally harmony is seen like it is laid out linearly, like on a keyboard. We say this is a first degree, this is a second degree, third degree. We think of it like steps, like we think of that bass key, like this is a C major, this is a D minor, this is a E minor, this is a F major, blah, blah, blah. And we think of it like it is a sequence of chords that we have. But the way our brain operates is different. So there's the auditory cortex, where all the signals in the end are coming together in your brain. And on that cortex, there's actually a two-dimensional map. And on that two-dimensional map, every chord that you can listen to has one point. And if you have chords that sound very harmonious together, then they are close together on that map. And on that same map, things that doesn't sound harmonious with each other, like a tritonus,
or a ninth chord or something like that.
Something like that.
Yep.
Yeah. Then you will see that the response of your brain, like which neurons are active on the two-dimensional map, is also spread out. And if you have two chords that are clashing with each other, then you find that they are on faraway points on that map. So there's a principle of locality, and it is two-dimensional. And I think that's the key point. And that's also the base of my theory. So it's simply just a matter of how to lay out that pitch classes in such a way that you get to that same two-dimensional mapping. And because this is still not satisfactory, the next question is, how does it come that our brain does it? It's not arbitrary. So the question is, what's the root behind it? And this is now getting a little bit too complicated for this podcast, and I don't want to bore everyone. But it is, yeah, but it will be important. There's one key point, and that is the following. When you play a note, any sound, let's say you play a piano middle A, like a chamber A, then you will say, yes, this is 440 hertz. But this is only the fundamental frequency. You also have the overtones. So there's also on that, if you play that 440 hertz note, you will also have sound energy at 880 hertz. And you will have another one at 3 times 440, which is 1,320, and so on. And this series is given by the physics. This is there. This is nothing that our brain does. This is something that physics does. It has good reasons why this is happening in that way with the overtone series. And if you right now feed a classical learning algorithm with a 2-dimensional map and say, hey, I give you just wild sounds that you can hear in the nature, like hitting things and blah, 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 then all of these sounds will always have the overtone series. And now I say, hey, create a map of all these sounds so that it makes sense. And if you just give that task to whatever algorithm, it will always come up with the same 2-dimensional map, which we find in our brains, and which is also the base for my simplified theory of harmony. And the important point is there's a connection between the series of overtones and the way how we perceive harmonies. And the next sentence I'm going to say is maybe a little bit hard to believe, or at least it is not obvious and not from what I said before. But the point is, we tend to believe harmony and timbre, timbre is a thing that depends on the overtones, are two separate things. And to some extent, it is true. We tend to believe these are independent of each other, and that's wrong. Actually, you could draw a line, and then on one end you have harmony, and on the other side you have timbre. And between you can draw a line, and you can find at any middle point between them, you can also do things meaningful. So it's actually harmony and timbre are actually the same concept if you view it from a little bit more abstract view. And that is also one of the key elements for the future development of my instruments, because this opens quite interesting new approach to music, because there's a middle room where harmony and timbre, let's say, molds together, where you can have very exciting and new things to express yourself. And I think there's a couple of papers about it. And I think right now we know enough about this so that we can make the first instruments who will actually make use out of it. And so this, I believe this is one of the most exciting things that are going to happen in the next 10 years about music. But I may be wrong. Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, well, doesn't I mean, your approach with the bass, with the tone color, because I mean, tone color to me, tone color or color is timbre. So is that am I right off the map here? But your approach with a bass is kind of touching on some of those aspects that you've just discussed there.
Yes and no. So you are right. So let me explain. When I try to learn everything about perception of music, I was surprised that we know so little about it. And most of it that we know only about listeners from Western cultures, which are exposed to the same kind of music and stuff like that. So we don't really know a lot about what is really influenced by your listening habits. So, and then I thought, okay, in order to get a better understanding, I also need to learn everything else about perception. And then I found something which is quite fascinating, and that is we have a perception of tones, and we use certain terms to describe the timbre of a tone. So for example, we say it's dark, or it's light, or it is warm, or it is cold. We say it is rough, it is piercing, and we use exactly the same vocabulary that we use to describe surfaces and the tactile aspects of surfaces, whether it is rough, whether it is, and that is when you can show pieces like materials or things to people and say, what do you believe if I hit it? How is it going to sound? And people can anticipate it. And so there is that deep connection that we already have in our minds, that everyone has in our minds, where the visual is connected with your audio perception. And so I thought in Abyss, I did that first step. I thought it would also be good to memorize things, because you will, instead of saying, oh, damn, how was that preset called? It was something like crazy bass, blah, blah, blah. It's much easier to recall, hey, I think it was that yellowish, greenish point in the upper left. This is how our brain works. And so I thought it would be good to have this as a metaphor, especially if you have tons of these tone colors and you need to somehow create an organizing principle into it. And what I found fascinating is that when Abyss was released, the first reaction of people was, that's just a gimmick. Nobody needs it. Why is it colors? Why can't I have just 3D knobs? Blah, blah, blah. That was in the first few weeks. And then that picture changed, and people came back to me and said, oh, wow, I tried that thing. And first I was a little bit thinking, what the fuck?
Yep.
And now
like
you. And then what I heard again and again is that they said, and then it made me change my process. It changed the way how I think about sound design. So for example, I did that gradient and it sounded great. And then I realized, oh, I have only yellowish, greenish things here. Wouldn't it be great to add a little bit of contrast? Well, what would work well here? Maybe I can try something bluish here. And so they started naturally to think more in that kind of contrast. And they said that's a game changer for them, because they have now a completely different way to approach their sound design, and they end up with different and better results than they would have without, because they do not only have their ears, they also have that kind of visual thing. And they have that, let's say, abstract thing where like that contrast somehow right now becomes a visual thing. So it springs to your eyes whether there is contrast or there is no contrast. Is there a contrast between light and dark? Is there a contrast of the color? Is whatever.
Like their visual intuition in a way.
Yeah. Or blue, blue to orange or blue to red, so what's that cold to warm? That was the first, no, it wasn't the first walkthrough that I watched, but I remember that when I'm going, tone color. Oh, yeah. Yeah. He's actually given us a color.
Yeah.
Because I'd always refer to timbre or timber, depending on which side of the pond you're from. But we used to say tone color back in the day when I was doing my learning about synthesis. We'd use tone color or timbre interchangeably. But I never thought of actually going, hang on, tone color. What color is it? All right. So that fascinated me, the way that you actually approach that. And the synth itself, if people haven't seen the GUI, it almost looks like, who's that artist that does all the dots? Monet. Is it Monet? He does all the paintings in the dots. Is it Monet? Help me out here.
I'm not sure.
Yeah. That impressionist? Yeah, that's Monet.
Yeah, Monet. So it kind of, it doesn't look like a Monet painting, obviously, but it kind of gave me that. It gave me that impression, because there's color dots all over the place, and you just grab one and you go, okay, I want a tone that might be a bit kind of sharper or colder. So you head for a blue, and then you want something a bit warmer, and you'd head for the warmer color. So That was, I think that was the video. That was I was what the fuck moment. Right, there was that one, and there was a few. There was Novum and stuff as well. But before, because I want to go through those, and you've almost covered in that explanation that you just gave. You've almost covered the next 2 or 3 points I had down in the run sheet, which was great. But I just want to go back real quickly to your early adventures in AI, because let's just put a pause just for a second, right? Because we're going to come back to your approach to synth designs, because it is so unique. But the AI stuff, and we were discussing this in our pre-chat last week, the 3 of us, right? Going, well, what do you mean AI? Because you were saying, 25 years, man. I've gone, hang on, that's fucking 1998. And I'm like, what? What are you talking about? What AI? And I mean, look, for a lot of people listening in, they would have no concept, absolutely no concept that AI goes back that far. Now, you were saying it goes back to the 50s, so let's not go back there. But your work in AI wasn't with music back then, though, was it?
No, it was not with music. It was so it all started at the university. We had I think there was one seminar about AI, and it was fascinating because I think in the first lesson, we learned about an algorithm which also, let's say, creates similar representations like that you can find in the brain. And that was, for me, a fascinating moment, because I really loved all that mathematics stuff that I learned at university, but it was also kind of real abstract nonsense. And I was, especially the field of algebraic topology that I specialized on, it is really abstract nonsense. I don't think that anything that I ever did in that field is going to have an application in the next 500 years. It is still interesting from a mathematical perspective, but it was really far away from any application.
Yeah, but didn't you did mention that your AI work led you into, was it the medical field?
Yeah, that's different. Because with AI, then I suddenly said, I realized, okay, you can do really interesting math things. You can do simulations of it on a computer, and it has applications. And so at least this is what I taught to my co-student and friend back that time. And he said, what kind of applications? I said, well, just think of a company, and maybe they want to know who is the next customer who is going to quit the contract. Wouldn't it be good to know it in advance, and maybe to identify those customers where it makes sense to send someone and say, hey, we have a new offer for you, and to tell them apart from those customers where even if you send one and give them a good offer, they are going to cancel that contract anyways. They can save millions and billions of money if we just give them these simple tools.
Right.
And then we said, oh, okay, cool. So let's create a startup and just do it. And that's what we did. So there were a few technical challenges because computers back then were not that powerful. Mm-hmm. So and they did not have that much storage. And I think the standard back then was to have everything in relational databases, and even doing a query on such a huge database could take hours or days.
Right.
And so back then they started to create data warehouses so that overnight there could be done a lot of processing so that next day the managers can look on charts that had been created automatically overnight. And I said, this is not going to work like that. We need to extract that data from the database, compress it so that it fits into memory of a, let's say, medium-sized computer so that it is not too expensive. And then we need to do all the computations on that compressed thing. So we need to really make these algorithms as efficient as possible. And the other thing that I thought is important, when we talked to companies, how they're doing their data projects. That was always run by teams. And they had a team of statisticians.
I think.
Thank you.
That's it. Yeah.
These guys.
Those guys.
These guys, and then they had people who had the domain knowledge, and you say, "Yeah, I know how this works," and no, you need to know that in this database's field, it is called gender, but actually we put different information there. Blah blah blah. And the point is, these two people, they don't speak the same language. The one guy will say, well, we need to find out those customers who are going to quit their contracts. And the other guy says, you need to run a Fisher test with a confidence interval of 0.05, and then we need to make an alpha beta test, and boom. Nobody can understand what they're talking about. And so I thought what's needed is a tool where the domain expert can just play with the data in a visual way. And the software itself takes care that whatever you do, it is sound in a mathematical way. So if it is showing you a graph or a decision tree or whatever, it will always ensure that it is mathematically sound. So the software is that kind of a statistician guy in the software, but in a hidden way, so that he will never talk to you about confidence intervals or whatever. The software just will take care for it on your own. And yeah, it took a little bit of, let's say, thinking and experimenting to make that work. But in the end, it worked quite well. So it was a simple tool. You could import the data from your database. It was then all in memory, so that gave you fast processing. So you could do everything in real time, and then you could, you had visual tools to say, okay, first I need to understand my data. So it gave you some kind of two-dimensional map of the data. You could zoom in to get more of the details. And then you could do decision trees like, and this decision trees you could also do for prediction. And by doing so, you could say, okay, what are actually the attributes of my data that tell me interesting things about my customers? And to give you an example, so we did a project for a large telecommunication company, and they had a huge amount of customers, and they didn't know. It's amazing, but and hard to believe nowadays, but back then it was normal. They did not know who are our customers where we really make good money with, and who are the customers who actually are loss-making. Back then, the telecommunication companies usually gave you a mobile phone for free for 2 years if you made that 2 years contract. But if you were running that contract only with the base cost, they were even not getting that money in that financed that mobile phone. So for them, it would have been very important to know what are those customers where it is actually useful to give them good contracts, and what are the customers that we should compete for. And it was quite interesting because at the telecommunication companies, 80% of their customers, they were making loss on. And there were 20% of customers where they're making all their money.
The 80-20 rule.
The 80-20
yes,
rule,
this is a Pareto principle of that 80-20. Interestingly, marketing-wise, only 5% of their marketing efforts went after that group of that 20% that made all the revenue. And 95% of the marketing was to get even more of those customers of the 80% where you are making more loss and more loss and more loss.
They were losing money. Yeah.
And now we come to the main challenge that we had to fight back then. So normally nowadays we are so used to take data and then have a look to the data, accept that the data is somehow a representation of the real world, and then we draw careful conclusions from it. That concept was not in the minds in the mid of the 90s. So we talked to the management and said, hey, this is what your data says. And I said, yeah, but this is not fitting to our strategy. And I said, yeah, well, but your strategy is going to fail because this is real world data. If this is your strategy, then your strategy can't work. Of course, I did say that in a more polite way, but yeah, but it didn't work out. And so they decided, no, but that strategy was done by the most experienced managers, and we always trusted their gut feeling. Long story short, 3 years later, they had to lay off half of their staff because they had all that losses and it completely failed. And yeah, they could have known years earlier. Actually, we showed them because the data was so clear. But the minds were not open back then to really understand that data can be gold, and that data is not just a bunch of information, but it can help you to make good decisions.
Yeah. So that was your first adventure into AI.
Yes.
Yeah. Now I just want to because we're going to go down a rabbit warren and we've got a stack to cover. So
sorry,
that's okay. But I just want to make one point with that early, when you said that you were toying with the early AI back in the 90s. I was watching a recent, just a doco. It wasn't a doc. Yeah, I suppose it was a documentary on how we actually arrived at where we are with AI at the moment. Mm-hmm. And there was a guy in the late 90s, a musical professor, who developed a program that would actually just sit there and analyze. I think they were using Bach pieces, for example, right? Mm-hmm. And I think let's just say, for example, Bach, 30 pieces, 30 sonatas, and the guy had built a program. He developed a program where it would analyze the music and develop patterns in how Bach would assemble the music. And so they of course, which was quite controversial back then. So it was what he did. There was a challenge at a university where he had a university. He had a composer, a professional composer, who was also a university professor, who wrote a piece in the style of Bach. There was a Bach piece itself, and then he had the computer that had done the analysis of all of the different pieces, then actually create a piece of music in that style. And those three pieces of music were actually played by real life musicians in a auditorium. They had a night where they played the three pieces separately, and it was like a double blind test. People didn't know which was the Bach piece, which was the Bach styled piece written by the human composer, and which one was actually written by the music program that he developed. I can't remember the name of it now, but let me reiterate: this was sheet music that was actually played by humans. But at the end, the audience, who were obviously music lovers, musicians, and students of the university, they were asked to pick which one was which. And the majority of people actually picked the computer-generated one as the real Bach piece, which actually infuriated the music professor, who just thought it was an absolute abomination. But the thing was that the piece of music that the computer program generated, played by real musicians, the audience they felt that it actually felt more Bach than Bach.
Interesting.
So that was I think that was an example of the first thing with AI with music. Obviously, nowadays it's we're completely down a different rabbit warren, but we're not going to go there, Peter. I think we're going to get back to your synth designs, because a lot of what you've just said is given us an insight into your philosophies towards your designs, which is very, very different. I mean, the majority of virtual synth designers, they'll be replicating vintage designs with analog modeling or copying traditional or more conventional synth designs, Wavetable, Additive, FM. I mean, you've got a combination of all of this plus stuff that is, way out of that field as well. Let's cover some of the other synth design philosophy stuff that you've got. Like, I mean, let's talk about Cult.
Yeah. Before we go into Cult, maybe one general word about how I do approaches. I think there are already so many great companies who are making that virtual analog emulations of, and I think right now there's really everything that has ever existed. There's some good virtual analog model of it.
Yes.
I think there's no need for me to do the same thing again and again. So I rather like to find my sweet spot. What I love most is where there is that sweet spot of being creative in the flow with sound design and music. And very often I think even when you compose music and you don't compose music just on sheet paper, but you do it together with your computer, that kind of sound design and composition blends a little bit into each other, even if you do classical stuff, because then you think, should it be a little bit more woodwinds? Should I go to the high register? Should I go more double reed, or should I go more to the flutes or whatever? And which is also a kind of sound design. You're thinking of the tone colors, and it goes hand in hand with your composition. And I think I want to make instruments that appeal to this process and which make it easy for you to get into that flow. And for this, I think it's very important that the instruments have an organic feel, not only from the way how you use it, but also from the way how they sound. Because otherwise, if they do very static sound, this will work in a few genres. But other than that, you will always think, no, that's too sterile. And then you need to do a lot of work to make it sound organic. And so that's for me always a starting point. Whatever I do, it has to sound organic. Otherwise, I'm probably not the right person I would not like to make an instrument for that. So, and there's a Japanese philosophy of wabi-sabi, where you don't celebrate the perfection of things, but where you celebrate the imperfection of things.
Right.
Yeah, you enhance the imperfections in a way.
Yeah. And so we are so used to say, oh, it's new, it's perfect from the factory, it's shiny, so that's the best thing. But for example, with this philosophy of wabi-sabi, which you can, for example, find in this tea bowls, a tea bowl which has been used for, let's say, 20 or 50 or 70 years, will get a patina over time. It will get that patina inside from the tea. It will get a different patina from the outside, from your hands. The way how the colors that paint is chosen for these things is all to create that right patina. And if you have something that has that patina so that you can see this tea bowl was used over 70 years, day by day, it was hauled by hands, that thing is going to be 50 times expensive than the one that you can get shiny out of the factory. Because, you see that also with, for example, violoncellos or violins. The best ones always have these. You can see that they had been played for a very, very long time.
Yeah, they've got the wear mark. They've got the human marks on them. Yeah.
Yes, and this kind of imperfection in terms of sound. This is also where I am fascinated by, and where I always try to get that good part of that imperfection into my synth creations. And so I spent a lot of time to understand what are actually the mathematics and what kind of digital signal processing or analog signal processing do you actually need? Where do these imperfections come from? What is it actually? I in the beginning, I thought, okay, I would just look for a paper and read about it, what people figured out about it. And yeah, there's almost nothing. There's almost no research. No one has actually created that. So I had to find my own way, and I had to build my own theory. Where does it actually come from? At the beginning, I was even not able to measure it or to explain it, and I was not able to create it by purpose. And so I had to look to other areas. And one of these areas that I found fascinating was chaos theory. And there's something which is called strange attractors. And these already also look very good and appealing. And they are like trajectories in a 3D space. And they are sometimes looking a little bit wild, but they also have some regularity. And when I saw them and I was still thinking about where does actually imperfection in sound come from, I immediately said, well, that's chaos. And these strange attractors are actually looking like sounds. And so I tried it the other way around. So I used recordings from like clarinet, bassoon. I'm a bassoon player, so I had a lot of bassoon recordings. And then I said, well, if right now I take this sound wave and find a way how I can put it, how can I transform it such that it becomes a trajectory in 3-dimensional space? I had to figure out a little bit how to do it. And when I did it, I was surprised because I said, I saw, damn, it looks like these strange attractors from chaos theory. And so that helped me to, first of all, create a theory of where these imperfections and quasi-periodicity comes from. So where you don't have exact periodicity, but you have sort of periodicity. And I could start making my own DSP theory so that I can control it. And I said, well, if I can do it that way around, that I can take a sound and visualize it in 3D and it looks like a strange attractor, then why shouldn't I not just take that strange attractor and do it the other way around and see if I can transform it to an audio wave? And that was just a little step to do it. And I said, damn, that sounds good. This sounds like you're driving an analog synthesizer very, very hot and let's say a little bit out of the parameter range that the manufacturer has chosen for it. So it was a little bit rough and wild, but it had that real analog feeling. And yeah, so I think I took something like 300 of these strange attractors that I could find in literature. And then I chose the ones that are from my taste and from what I thought best suited as a base to create instruments from it. And then I said, okay, what else do you need to make it a good instrument? Yeah, and that is how Cult came to be.
Right, and just to explain to the people listening in, Cult. I mean, it look, a lot of the sounds have, not a lot of the sounds, but some of the sounds definitely have an analog feel to them, and it was interesting what you just said, that the way you approached it, that the first thing that you heard was kind of analog way. And let's be clear, you know, the thing that attracts people to analog is the imperfection to the sound. It's not the perfection to the sound. Right? So that's why everyone's gone back to these kind of more analog type of synthesizers of late, you know, as because of the imperfections that were within analog and a lot of the sterility, is that the word? The digital approaches that we had in the 90s and the early 2000s. So that's something that you've definitely moved away from with your designs. And so Cult was That's the one where I've noted down where it says strange attractors and chaos theory. So, and I suppose the listeners have to do probably a little bit of research what strange attractors and chaos theory is.
Yeah.
But in the approach of synth design, it is unique, to say the least. Yeah.
And I think there's one more aspect that I found useful with Cult, and that is that visualization of sound as a trajectory in three-dimensional space. So essentially, you see that sound, but you don't see a sound wave like a sine wave, but you see it more like a three-dimensional thing. It looks like a band, which is a little bit knotted in 3D. And that band is always moving a little bit. And you can hear the synchronicity of how it moves and what changes in your ear. And it was fascinating then. FM synthesis is always something where people say, "Oh, damn, FM synthesis! No."
It's very harsh, yeah.
It's harsh and it's hard to program. It's hard to get okay, I have that algorithm and here is a modulator, which is also an operator, and that modulates this carrier, which is also an operator, and I have a ratio. Boom! Nobody understands it. It's not really intuitive. But here, you also can, in Cult, you can do some FM timbres, and you can do it very simple because it's more working like a filter. You can say, "Hey, give me more FM."
Yep.
Yeah.
And the nice thing is you can see what it does to your sound, and then you suddenly see what is about that ratio, and because with that ratio you see that suddenly it turns in a way that it goes pretty wild, and then there are some settings of the ratio where it makes turns so that it, let's say, just turns always by 60 degrees so that it overlaps with itself. And this is exactly those positions where you get that sweet spot of sound. And now it's a little bit hard to explain it here in a podcast, but my point is, when you do it and when you see for the first time how that FM actually operates, all that question marks disappear and it immediately becomes something very intuitive.
Yeah.
Because you're visualizing it, yeah.
Yeah, and you get a lot of visual feedback to see, okay, do I need to turn it more to the left or to the right if I want to tame the sound and so on.
Yeah, and I think that's what I found unique in that whole visual aspect of, okay, so I'm twiddling this dial, and of course you're listening, but you've also got that visual feedback. But I mean that's something that is not that is something that part of the design with all your synthesizers, you do have that visual feedback, and that's something that's something you've purposely done, obviously.
But also like how intuitive it is. It's almost like it's the polar opposite of how you were using the Yamaha sampler back in the day.
Yeah, but look, if you think about it, I mean, we've all done sound design at various times, and even with my my 90s digital hybridy type of synths that I used to do a lot of synth programming in, I never used to look at the screen. I used to just, because I've got it, like, for example, my JD800, I've got all my faders and stuff, right? Mm-hmm. But even with the let's say my JD990, which is a kind of an Uber module of the JD800, there's no faders or anything there. No, sorry, I was looking at the screen, but I was listening but there's no visual feedback. It's like, oh, okay, so I'm raising the filter up a certain amount, and there is with the envelopes and stuff, you might get some visual feedback, but it's nothing like what Peter has implemented here. As the sound's changing, you're not getting a visual representation of how the sound is actually being manipulated and changing the waveform itself. You're just hearing it, right? You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, and I think that was a conscious choice. So before I started with Dawesome, I also started something like 2 years before, maybe with Eurorec and having a modular synthesizer, and it was so much fun, and it was so different. In the beginning, I just plugged things together, and then I had those drones and stuff like that, and I said, "Damn! But how am I supposed to make a track right now from it? Because I was so much used to that classical approach of, oh, okay, I have melodies, I have harmony, I have my rhythmic elements, I can arrange stuff, blah, blah, blah. And now I had that beast producing all kind of weird stuff, and I had no idea how to do it. But it was very fun. And I thought, why is it that it is giving me so much fun? And I thought, okay, it's very intuitive. At the same time, there's a lot of happy accidents. And so I said, okay, when I do plugins, they also need to invite that happy accidents. They need to be intuitive. They can still be deep, like a Euro rack, but they should be intuitive. So when you start with it, things should be relatively clear. And I said, well, but if I do a plugin, what are the advantages of doing something on a computer as opposed to do it in Eurorack? And I said, well, on a computer, I have that big screen. So unless I really make use out of that big screen and I really add value by using it, by having a great representation that helps me in my creative process, which may be even sparking ideas, or which at least should accelerate my workflow, then I'm missing a chance. If there's just a visual display of knobs that could also exist in hardware, well, then I would always prefer to just have these knobs in hardware, because this is 10 times more intuitive to twiddle these ones.
Yep.
And yeah.
Yeah, so of course, I mean, and that's the majority of synths now. The virtual synths is that they have, a representation of the physical hardware, and you're turning the knob and you can hear it, and that's all well and good, but you're not having the visual representation. So that is what I find unique with your synths. Now, let's just move on to let's have a bit of a chat about Novum, because that's granular. Advanced, granular, and I've got spectral synthesizer. Now, is that a correct description of it? I'm asking a question. So I know it's a granular, an advanced granular, but I saw a mention of a spectral synthesizer as well. Is that correct, or is that incorrect?
Yeah, it's both is correct. So I think the key idea of Novum is I wanted to make an instrument where you can drop one sample, not a multi-sample. You have just one sample, and then it should be that easy to turn this one sample into an instrument that you can play and have fun with, and which is really behaving like a musical instrument.
Right.
So not like a sampler, there's that awesome contact. But if you want to make a good instrument for contact, well, then first you need to go into the studio, then you need to do a lot of tedious recording, then you need to do a lot of reworking your samples, arrange them, write scripts for it, blah, blah, blah. It's a long way to create something for it. And I wanted to make the opposite. Just give me one sample, and it shouldn't be a sample which has the requirement of a perfect recording under perfect conditions. It should be something, it should work well with something like, oh, I just had my iPhone and grabbed the sound, blah, 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 and now I want to make it an instrument. That should be doable.
Yep.
And so if you want to do that, what's the problem? You have that sample, and that sample is a blah, blah, blah. And if you hit it again, it's again, blah, blah, blah. It's always the same. It's so static. So the question is, how can you make that sample into something liquid, into something that you can form, that you can change, that if you play it with a, let's say, MPE controller, and you say, now I give it a little bit more pressure, so that sample changes. And so I had the idea to use a little bit of machine learning technology, and that splits the sample into 6 layers. Normally we do it the other way around. In our DAWs, we take 6 tracks, or we layer 6 instruments, and then we create that master epic instrument where you have, with every key that you press, you hear 6 sounds at the same time. But here it's the other way around. Just take a sample and ask the machine learning algorithm, hey, I give you that sample and I pretend that sample would have been a layer of 6 other samples. So please figure out what are these 6 samples that if I layer them again, I get back my original sample.
Right. Okay.
And once you have that in Novum, you can, and that's just by drag and drop a sample. It will take 1 or 2 seconds, and then you have that decomposition into the 6 layers. And now you can play with each of these layers individually. You can change their envelopes, how they change over time in the sample. You can change their spectral content, like making it more noisy, making it more sharp, or whatever. And all these, there's a lot of things that you can do, like drawing a new envelope, but that will just give you a different sound. But you also would like to create an instrument, something that responds to the way how you play and so on. So it needs to react to modulations. And I said, okay, granular playback is perfect for it because it gives you a lot of influence where in that sample I want to be. And so, for example, one of the earliest sounds that I made when I had the prototypes of Novum was I had a trombone sound, and it was just from a very, very soft piano to a very aggressive forte. It was just one sample with a tone. And that is so easy with a granular synth because you have this decoupling of the playback position and the pitch. You could just say, okay, the harder I press on my keyboard, the more I want to go into that forte of that sample. And the less I press, I want to stay in that piano thing. So normally with a multi-sampled instrument, you would record 10 layers and then you would do crossfading between these layers with all that phasing problems and stuff like that. And here you just drop that one sample. It has that nice motion, but you don't use it as a motion. You need it as an expressive control. And I got that perfect expressive trombone-like sound, and I could even make it a little bit otherworldly by tweaking the grain parameters. Yeah, and I think that's the fascinating element of playing with Novum, that you can take any sample and make it so expressive.
Yeah. Now that actual example that you've given, that's in the walkthrough. I'm pretty sure that's exactly in the walkthrough. So if anyone wants to actually visualize and actually hear what Peter just explained, if you go through to the Novum walkthrough, that example is there, and that's the one that I think that was one of my what the fuck moments, because I just
another one.
Yeah, that was another one.
Yeah.
Hey, let's move on to Myth. Now, Erin has been involved with Myth quite heavily, so I'm going to probably hand the gavel over to Erin with this one. With you guys can just sit there and have a bit of a chat about Myth, which is the new synthesizer, Peter. Now, I've got this down as, ready, non-linear multi-format synthesizer. Is that description kind of in the ballpark, or am I just miles away?
I guess so. It's I always struggle a little bit with these
the descriptions. Yeah, with
these descriptions, and I also decided that from now on, with all my future instruments, I'm no longer going to do all this marketing bullshit stuff. I'm sick and tired of it. So I always offer a 90 days free trial without any bells and whistles. You can just download. You need to click one start trial, and then that 90 days start. And I think for the future, I will just say, hey, here's a new thing. This is what it can do. And if you're interested, just try it out yourself, but don't force me to say, well, it's kind of MF-ish, but not really, because it also, yeah.
Okay, well, then I'm going to let Erin try and Erin, why don't you
describe it?
Why don't you describe what Myth is? Because we've had some conversations on this one, and you know, look, I was hearing a whole stack of different elements in there. I was hearing like some wave term stuff. I was hearing wave sequencing type of stuff. There's all manners of things. So off you go.
Yeah. I can do all sorts of things. I mean, I didn't really, when I first started playing around with it, I don't really think about what it's doing or why it's doing things. I just, I love working with samples. That was what drew me to your synths in the first place, Peter, which was Novum. And I think this is probably why when I first heard Novum, I was just like, wow, this is really kind of incredible.
Did you have a what the fuck moment, Aaron?
I did. It was the kind of thing of like, I mean, what you're talking about is pulling in one sample, and like, you know, the trombone sample you're talking about, you know, everything is within that one sound. You know, you've got your soft elements, your loud elements, you've got your different layers. It's kind of deconstructing that, and you know, being able to create something extremely expressive out of something which appears to be so minimal. So yeah, with Myth, for me it was like I just recorded a bunch of sounds and just started to drop them in and just let it do its thing to see what it would do. And actually, since like, you know, creating more musical patches, I've used it for like sound design, like film sound design, which is kind of more non-musical approach, creating sound effects and that kind of more abstract things. And it's very interesting in that sense as well, dropping in sounds that are not musical, that are atonal, and then the way that it kind of imparts a musicality or something interesting upon that as well. But one thing I wanted to ask you about was the transformers, which in Myth, which are very interesting, especially when you kind of link them to expression or modulation, and even in tiny little increments. It's like, it's kind of, even if you just use them in a very small way and you kind of find the sweet spot for each transformer, you can extract very expressive, interesting, organic sounds from, you know, the most simple sample. So yeah, I'm interested in kind of how you develop the transformers and what are they, I guess.
Yeah. So I think I actually don't know where exactly I had seen that. I even don't know whether I was reading a paper about it or whether I was watching a documentary. But the starting point was someone went to exhibitions where synth meetups and NAMM show and stuff like that. And they put cameras, and then they had a look to what are actually the elements that people that walk by and want to try out something with a new synth that they're actually using. They wanted to understand how are people approaching synthesizers. So they did all that video recordings, and then they transcribed these videos and in order to make their statistics. And what they figured out is 98% of what people are doing is they sweep the cutoff.
Yeah.
It seems like that is the one thing. Well, it always sounds nice. It was designed to sound nice. And that's the thing where you get something like you expect, because it's between a rich, aggressive tone, like you have it with a transient in a natural instrument, and then it fades away when you close the cutoff of a low pass, like the natural decay of acoustic instruments. And I thought, well, if that cutoff is that one thing that really resonates with people, we should give people more things like that cutoff thing.
Yeah.
Things like one dial where you can say, well, on one end, it is like having a lot of overtones. It's aggressive and maybe even harsh, or at least it's very strong. And on the other end, it is very soft and subtle. And then there's a natural sweep in between. But it should be different. It should not always be like, okay, that's a low pass. One could say, well, but an MS-20 filter sounds very different from a Moog filter, but they are still very close. And I thought, well, maybe there's there's a bigger space of possibilities that you can do. And that was the idea of the transformers, because I thought that will make it 10 times easier to make a very expressive instrument, because you just need to map any of your expressive controls, whether it's your mod wheel or an MPE pressure or your expression pedal or whatever you use, map it to one of the transformers, and then you already have something that plays and feels like an instrument, and you get it out of nothing. You don't need to spend hours of coding, programming, or whatever. And the only difficulty was how to implement them. And I think that's going back to your question, what they actually are. So before I told, when I was looking for where does the imperfection in sound come from, I found these strange attractors, and I found this representation of sound as a trajectory through a multi-dimensional space, like a 3-dimensional space. But what you can do in 3 dimensions, as a mathematician, you are trained, well, if it works in 3 dimensions, it will also work in 11 or 20 or whatever. So even though you can't visualize it that well, you can do it and use that mathematical properties. And from that perspective, if you do it in 1 dimension, you have a waveform. If you do it in 2048 dimensions, you will get something like a spectral representation. And I thought there must be a sweet spot in between. And if signals are represented in, let's say, an 8-dimensional or 4-dimensional space, I said, well, I can change the trajectory of a sound if I just squeeze, let's say, the space. For example, if I think of the space where that curvy sound is right now looping around, and I squeeze it, or I deform it, or I bend it, or I twist it, then these will change the shape of the sound, and in this way they will modify the sound. So these transformers are all based on that same idea. So I did a lot of experimentation. What kind of transformations of the space are ending up with something that you can use for musical purposes? And I think this is just the start with the transformers. So these are the ones that I have found and chosen for this. But I think there's plenty more that can be discovered and explored.
Yeah, right. It's interesting because the different transformers, some of them have sweet spots for different sounds, which I found it's just like, what I'll do is I'll drop a sound in there and then just go through each one, and I'll always find a couple, and it's never the same ones usually. And it's like, oh, wow, that actually works really well with that sound, and gives it something or does something with it. And it's kind of like what you were saying with the filter cutoff. It's like that. You find something that really resonates with the sound or the sample you've dropped in. It's very, very cool.
I think also what I like about it personally is they somehow interact with each other. It is not like, oh, I can do that one and then I add the other one. It's like it's linear. Yeah. Because it is not linear. And then it is, if you first you do the one, okay, and then you take the other one, and then you do both, and you get something different because they very often interact with each other. And that's also fascinating. And I find it quite natural how they behave.
Yeah, that's right. And sometimes it may not be necessarily even increasing it. It may be, one might be going decreasing, the other one might be increasing, and the way they interact and the kind of sweet spot they meet. Yeah, it's very, very interesting how that all works. And it just feels like there's just so much more to explore with that synth, just at the oscillator level, or just at the iris level. Mm-hmm. The other thing which I've really noticed as a kind of a point of difference with Myth is the effects section, and you have a very unique way of kind of presenting the effects and I guess choosing the effects. Like, for example, the BTTF is a really interesting one. Atari Punk.
Okay, so what's a BTTF? Oh, now I've got you. What is it?
BTTF.
Yeah,
Back to the Future.
Oh, but
Yeah, actually it is. And so I had that idea to make it a little bit more modular, but I didn't want to have the complexity of a modular system. And I said, okay, I want to have something that gives you all the freedom of a modular system, but I don't want to have that weird, nobody understands what's going on thing. And so I took inspiration from pedal boards that you have usually when you're a guitar player. And I said, well, why not make it very simple and just chain modules? So there's no cables. You always have that same signal flow. It goes from left to right. And you can still do extremely complex things because you can modulate each of the parameters. And by choosing this kind of modular approach, I said, well, and that's also perfect because right now I can secretly put some weird stuff into it, which normally would never make it into a synth, because when you're doing a synth like Novum, I think normal people have no clue how much work goes into that. You have tons of ideas, you implement lots of things, and then you say, yeah, but where should I squeeze it into the UI? And is it really worse to make the UI more complex by adding 3 more dials here just to get this additional possibilities? And with that modular approach, I can do crazy stuff, and it's just another module. Nobody needs to use it if they don't want to, but it allows me to create this kind of fancy stuff that would never make it into a normal synth. Yeah, and
that's
BTTF
right.
is one of those.
Yeah, BTTF, the modal is, that's amazing because it's like you can drop sounds into that as well, and then kind of affect the oscillators.
Yeah, guys, you still haven't explained what BTTF is.
Oh, yeah, so BTTF...
Oh, come on, Vince, Back to the Future.
Okay, all right, it's a Back to the Future plug-in.
Okay, so BTTF is doing the following. It does FM, the frequency modulation, with feedback.
Right.
And that's an innovation in itself, because normally with FM, you can only do it with sine waves. But here you can have it as a sound effect working on that stream of music or tones that is coming from your oscillator, and which may have been processed by other modules already before. Okay. And then you can do this FM with feedback. And very often you get that typical 80s sounds, like you can make it a little bit FM-ish. You can get the typical FM brass-like sound timbres with it, and you can get that crazy stuff. But whenever I played with it, or very often when I played with it, I said, damn, it sounds so 80s. And so I decided to call it just Back to the Future.
Back to the Future, there you go. Well, look, my only FM synthesizer, because I've got a whole stack of, 90s, we'll call them the 90s classics, if there's any such thing. But I've got a TG77, which was the last of the FM.
Yeah. And
there's also a PCM, and there's also kind of like, filters and that type of stuff. But mate, I never touch the FM side. So I'm like, what the fuck do I do there? I'm pretty much just pulling something from the FM side and then just living in the more, analogy, or it's not analog, but the more traditional oscillator, filter, envelope type of world. I get completely lost with FM. So, anything that simplifies that is a good thing.
There's someone somewhere in the internet did something very interesting, and that is, nowadays you can find this databases of 40,000 DX7 sounds, and everyone thinks, oh damn, there are 40,000 DX7 sounds.
They all sound 30,000, 30,900, and 900 sound the same. No, mate, you're kidding.
That's a point, and someone did take these patches and then squeezed it into such a program that you use in genetics to find who is the ancestor of whom. So usually you put genes into it to create that, how's it called? That family tree or whatever.
Yeah, the DNA. Yeah, I've done that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so when you do it with all these FM sounds that are available, what you find is, well, there's basically something like 400 sounds.
Yep.
That are the ones that had been created with the original sound banks, and then with a couple of sound banks that these early pioneers made and published. And everything else is just one or two tweaks of one or two parameters.
Derivative. There you go. And it's exactly what I said.
Yeah.
I said 39,900. So I was
yeah.
I was a bit off. I wasn't far off.
Yeah.
Oh, well, there you go. Well, look, synthesizer engines, we don't get too sidetracked, but, my classic 90s synth, the other is the Kurzweils, with the vast. I mean, I never dived far enough into the vast side of things, and I've got a wave station, and I never dived far enough into the wave station either. I just always kind of went back more to the subtractive synthesis stuff, but I love the wave term, the wave table type of stuff, but I didn't have anything in the arsenal. But now this is the beauty of the virtual synthesizers, is that you can take all of those that are almost near impossible to not near impossible, but very difficult to get a collection of in the physical realm. And you can do it in the digital realm, but then combine them all together. I mean, it's just unheard. You couldn't physically make a synth like Myth or any of them. I don't think you could. Or Novum. Could any of these designs? Set. Yeah, could any of these designs actually be replicated in any way in hardware? Peter, do you think?
Well, nowadays, also in hardware, usually you have some microprocessors taking some of the work, and you only use the real analog path for those elements where it makes sense, like sometimes the oscillator, but very often even those, most of the time, these oscillators are at least digitally controlled so that they are frequency stable and stuff like that.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
Yeah. I think if I were to make an analog instrument, it would look quite different, because with Myth, again, I had that paradigm of, first of all, I would like to import samples, and that's more difficult if you have a hardware machine, still doable, but usually it's not the first thing, at least you think of. And the other thing was, okay, it should also have that kind of visual feedback centrally to what you're doing.
Yeah.
But I was always thinking of, okay, how would an instrument look like that I would like to do in hardware? And the one thing that I have in my mind, which I may do when I retire, because I think I don't have the background. I know about electronics, and during Corona, I made a modular synth. We created a modular synth, me with my kids, as a Corona project.
Wow.
But I have no clue about how to get something manufactured and then sold as a physical item. I have no clue about it. And I think it's a completely different and difficult business. So my concept for an analog hardware synth would look like that. Think of a huge pile of clay, so that you can model that clay. And inside of that clay, there are a lot of wires, and these wires are piezo wires. So they act, so when you bend them, they change. So they're inside of that huge pile of clay. And when you right now start molding the clay and modeling it, you will bend these wires, and these wires, because they are piezo wires, when you change the angle, when there's a torsion element, that will send electrical signals. And then there is that analog system, which is basically which either is a computer or which is basically a circuit, like Chewer circuit or any other of these chaos models. And then you feed in the sensor data from the clay into that model and in that model circuit. And so how you perform with it, so actually it's a drone instrument and you don't play it with a keyboard, but you just mold that clay thing. And when you change it, always that the tone is going to change, and you can revert it to some extent, but it is clay. You will never get it exactly back. So it's more like it's an experimental drone synthesizer with a different user interface. But I think that can be quite powerful because you can do such a lot of things with clay, and it is so intuitive to form things. And we have our visual representation, so we know that, okay, if I bend it here in that direction, we memorize how does it sound so that we can replicate it to some extent.
Okay.
Wow, sounds amazing.
That sounds amazing, and that's completely not what I was expecting. Oh boy! I mean, I've heard of people describe visions for alternate controllers, but I got to hand you that one,
yeah.
Peter. I'm like, what? Clay? Wait! I didn't know where you were going with it. I'm going with clay. What? Hey? What? But I can so it doesn't have to necessarily be clay. It can be a synthetic clay or something. Just something that's malleable.
Something like that.
Yeah, something that doesn't get your hands dirty.
Or a hologram.
Could you imagine these guys? I can't imagine the musicians getting their hands too dirty with clay.
Yeah, it should not make your hands dirty, but
Yeah, but it's electrical circuit, and if the clay's wet, it could be interesting, but
Or you become the oscillator.
Yeah, you become the oscillator. There you go. And now hang on, we're heading completely down a rabbit warren. Hey, just to pull this back real quickly. Actually, did we cover the effects? Because that was
no, we haven't got. We kind of did as part of Myth.
Yeah, part of Myth. That was another thing, Peter. When I went to your website and I'm looking at the products, and because you don't really define, well, you do kind of define, but I'm looking at Love, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm listening to it going, is that a synth? And I, for the first 3/4 of the video, I didn't know what the fuck it was. I thought it was a synth. And then I've gone, hang on, it's an effects, right? It's actually an effects processor. And I went, I get it now. And that was amazing. I mean, seriously, for the first 3/4 of the video, I thought it was a synthesizer. And I think Erin did as well.
Initially I thought it was, but then when I realized it was a plugin, I'm like, I got to get this thing.
then we both kind of came to the realization by the end of the video that it was actually an effects processor.
I think that even happened to me during development. Yeah.
That's funny.
During development, I think once I tried something, and I guess it was Logic, and you see, it's like muzzle brain, like click, 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 and then all my synths were listed, but there was not that Love thing. I said, damn, for one reason or the other, that plugin scanning did fail. And I think I spent something like 2 hours because I thought, okay, something went wrong with the plugin creation, and I could not find
funny.
The source of the error. Yeah. Until I realized, damn, it's an effect. It's not listed here.
No, it was
the exact thing happened to me.
It's in a different menu.
Yeah, no, that happened to me as well. When I got it, I was like, "Where is it?" It's like it's nowhere.
Well, wouldn't it be under other? It could be under
it's just
other.
under effects.
Oh, it's under
effects.
I
finally found it. Yeah, that was funny.
Oh, that's a classic. That's a classic. That's very, very funny, guys. There you go. So I'm not on an island,
Yeah, no.
Thinking, okay, what is it? And the other one is, and I don't really have too much of an angle on the chop suey. That's kind of like a kick. What is it? It's a kick drum creator. Is it a kick drum creator or a modulator?
Well, no, it's a kick synthesizer. So it's a synthesizer, but it is specialized on doing just one thing, but doing that thing really good, and that is to create kicks.
Kick drums, right?
And So that was a collaboration with Björn Torwellen, who is a techno producer from Germany.
Yep.
And he's also doing master classes. And I don't know how it came, but Björn and I get in touch with each other. And he said, in techno music, usually we spend 80% of our time when we make a track on the kick, because the kick has to be perfect.
Yep.
It has to work in the club, because if the kick is not transmission the right energy, if it doesn't cut through in the right way, the entire track is not going to work. So the kick is a key element.
Right.
And he said, well, there are a few tools where you can design kicks, but that's tedious, and that's normally just giving you the raw material to do the real work. And then he had something like an 8-hour masterclass, how a professional techno producer actually makes that perfect kick.
8 hours. 8-hour masterclass to how to make a kick drum.
Yes, how to make a
Sounds
perfect kick drum. And so my first reaction was, damn, you take a kick, and then what do you actually do with it? Is there so much that you can do with it? And then I was fascinated by watching how he is doing it. And philosophically, it's very simple, or conceptually. You have that transient, so that very first milliseconds, is it more clicky?
Yeah, the first hit, yep.
That shapes a lot of the character, and also how much does it pierce through the rest of your arrangement. Then you have the body. This is the part that comes after, and that is the one that gives the energy. And then you have that tail, and that is somehow gluing it with the other elements that you have in your mix. And it can make your kicks being a little bit more connected, or it can be that they are like individuals. And it was also fascinating to see how fiddly his workflow is, how often he has to change tool. And he says, and usually I do this in that tool because this is the only one where I can zoom in so much that I can really see the transient. And then there were all kind of issues. So usually how he is doing it, he takes different kicks, because he already has thousands, like every one of us, of kicks on his hard drives. And he said, okay, I like that transient of that one. I like that body of that one. And I like the tail of that one. And then he tries to glue them together.
Oh, boy.
But then you can get all kind of phase problems. You can't simply take the transient part and then the body and put them together, because the phase need to be exact in sync. Otherwise, you're losing the energy. And you even don't have the tools to really visualize it. And it's tedious and takes hours, and it's not a fun process. And so this is when after I watched that 8 hours of how to create a kick drum masterclass.
You actually watched the whole 8 hours?
Yes, it was really fascinating. I really learned something. And I think I spent also a lot of time to practice it myself, and also in the beginning I didn't believe. I said, there must be shortcuts, that must be easier. But I wanted to really become an expert for it before I start making a tool that's supposed to be used by experts. Yeah, and then basically I had that idea of making a tool where you have, first of all, that perfect visualization, which means that for the transient, you need to have an extreme zoom into the waveform. But for the rest, you don't want to have that much of a zoom, because otherwise you need to scroll and scroll and scroll and can't see the entire kick. And you need to make the transition with a fader, so that you can very granular and that you have that very precise control where exactly you want to blend between the transient and the body. And it needs to be done in a way that you can't get into that phase problems. Yeah. And this is how that Chop Suey tool was born. And it was an amazing, fun collaboration with Björn, who gave a lot of feedback to the early versions. And he has he knows everyone in the techno scene. So he gave that tour to a lot of techno producers who also gave their feedback. And I think it has become something like that. No more secret weapon of techno producers, but I think you will have hard times to find a techno producer who is not using Chop Suey for these kicks, because it makes a tedious, difficult process and brings it to something which is really fun. And so, for example, one guy said, normally, when he wants to make an album, he spent weeks on crafting kicks, and that's always that part that he hates about it. And then he had Chop Suey, and he said it was like a rush, and within 30 hours where he had no sleep, he created such great set of coherent kicks that right now he has in his mind already 3 albums where he will use all that kicks, because they also get that the process for techno producers seems to be a little bit different. They start with a kick and then they have that concept of the track follows after that kick. Yeah. So
the bottom up.
It's like
it's
like the creativity starter to have that perfect kick. Yeah.
Wow, there you go.
I haven't actually tried out Chop Suey, but I'm definitely going to have to now.
and to be, it is really optimized all about kicks. So in principle, you could drop other samples, but for example, it is mono because your kick is always going to be mono.
Yeah. Yep.
And these are limitations because it does one thing. And that one thing it does really good, and that is all about that kick design. But it is not that you can create only kicks for techno music. You can create kicks for all kind of electronic genres, because that process is always the same. And it's fun and gives you a lot of control.
Yeah, amazing.
Awesome. Yeah, well, the kick is so important as a kind of foundation for a lot of electronic genres and styles. For sure.
Yeah.
So sounds very, very useful, because kicks are one of those kind of things, you can sit there for hours just scrolling through samples trying to find something that works. So it'd be nice to be able to just create something quickly, but knowing that it's going to have, not going to have phase issues, and, you can get the various elements of the kick right. Sounds cool.
And there are a few other elements that normally you don't spend too much thinking of. And that is, for example, how to tune a kick drum. So in techno music, usually it will be a very low F sharp or G, or maybe an E, somewhere in that region. But of course, it depends on where your bass line is. And if you have a kick that is out of tune with your bass, it sounds awkward.
Yeah, totally.
And you need to have very trained ears to hear it in that very low range, and forget about all the tuners because these tuners are not made for kick drums. Because usually in the kick drum, you have, in the very beginning, you have that pitch drop. So it starts with a very high pitch in the very first 2-3 milliseconds before it reaches that thing. And so that was one of the challenges to create. So Chop Suey always shows you what is the perceived estimated pitch, but it is a specific algorithm which is geared to kick drums, because all the normal tuners simply fail.
Yeah,
totally.
I got to tell you, being a rock, just doing rock music.
Mm-hmm.
I'd never even had the concept that I'd needed to tune a kick drum to a frequency.
I forever tuning kick drums.
Really? Even in your pop and rock stuff?
I don't really do pop and rock, but I do a lot of bass heavy electronic stuff.
Yeah, but that's what I mean. So like in pop and rock, like if you got any of the other drum virtual instruments, there might be some tuning, but it's not something we'd go, hey, this is like the song's in this particular key. We need to tune the kick drum to that, unless I'm completely missing the boat.
I don't know. I think it's interesting when you tune drums to the key of a track in a way. Like, it doesn't have to be the fundamental, but if it kind of works harmoniously with the rest of the music, like the bass and the other instruments or vocals or whatever, it actually can make a real difference.
Yeah, and no doubt.
It's more of a feel thing. Like, it feels better.
Yeah,
it kind of locks in.
But do the acoustic kicks have really that much of a frequency element that?
Yeah,
they have, but the acoustic ones also have a lot of that higher frequency noise component, and that's different with electronic kicks, because in electronic kicks you often have that resonant frequency, which is almost like a pure sine. Of course, You don't have it in the transient, but in the body and the tail, it's almost a pure sine. You won't get that with a normal acoustic drum.
Right.
So that problem is amplified if you have electronic music. And then also the kick is much louder and much more prominent in most of the electronic styles, at least those, let's say, which are made for putting you on the dance floor compared with pop music.
Yes. Yeah. No, of course. There you go. I just wanted to kind of get an angle on that, because it's not something that I have ever even contemplated, actually tuning a kick to a frequency of the song or the key of the song. That's okay. Well, there you go. I just learned something.
But the point is, once you have heard about that concept and once you tried it out, the world is never going to be the same as before.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yep.
And I'm going to go back and listen to all my old stuff and go, oh man, that kick drum's out of tune with my bass. Thanks.
Yep.
Yeah, fantastic. Hey, let's just move on. Now we did discuss. We didn't discuss, but we mentioned MPE, which is MIDI polyphonic expression, right? Which is an extension to the MIDI spec that is been around for a good, probably about 10 years or so, and it's picking up more steam, and it's actually been implemented in the MIDI 2 spec. Peter, I'm not sure if you knew that one.
Yeah.
So your instruments are all MPE capable. Have you looked at MIDI 2 at all, or you haven't? It's still a bit early for you to kind of be diving into that side of it.
I have had a rough look into MIDI 2, and I think it's going to be implemented in the JUICE framework, which is the standard coding framework that almost all professional plugin makers use.
Yep.
And for me as a plugin or instrument maker, there is not so much that is going to change between nowadays, where it is using that MPE and then the future of MIDI 2, because the way it works, it is not going to change. For me, the more exciting element of it is that there are more and more MPE controllers, and that with the Ableton Push 3 right now, there's also an MPE controller which clearly addresses a completely different audience. And I think it's the same like with out of tune kick drums. Once you had been using a good MPE controller like the Seaboard or the Linstrument or the incredible Osmose keyboard, you never want to go back. Of course, still you would like to have an 88 keys hammer mechanic piano, or you would like to have that a classical synth 5-octave synth bed, which is light and allows fast play. But you also would always like to have that MPE controller, because it is simply amazing and giving you so much more expressivity over a single note.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, look, being a keyboard player, the Rolly instruments, I had a bit of a poke had a bit of a look at them, and I could see where they were very expressive, but it goes against traditional keyboard playing, obviously, because it's more of a membrane. It's more of a membrane, and then you can slide up and down. The level of expression is pretty amazing. It was interesting, just real quickly, I don't want to segue too far, but when I was doing the research with all the instruments we started discussing MPE, I had a look at the Rolly products here locally, and they disappeared here locally. So we did have a local distributor here for a while, and I won't go too in depth with what happened with that distributor, but they've basically been they've been acquired by someone else, and then they've been acquired, and then they've kind of just they've grown into a major distribution channel. But they dropped the Rolly products, and I've got a close friend who's a distributor, a music tech distributor, and I asked him about Rolly, and he just said great concept. He goes, but the products failed in the marketplace because people didn't want them. Which is that because maybe they were just a little bit too early to the market? I don't know. MPE's been around for a while. But that's kind of disappointing in that, there's no Rolly products here in Australia.
But how many synths are kind of designed especially to utilize what MPE can do, though, as well? I guess there probably weren't many.
Well, again, this is why they were probably a little bit early to the market, right?
Yeah.
And now with MIDI 2, you're getting a far wider acceptance. And with the level of expression that's going to bring, I think, it's just a shame that those products have disappeared from our local market.
But I think it's also due to what you said. The Rolly keyboard is not very friendly to your keyboard skills that you already acquired before. It's a new instrument that either wants to be learned new, and for me, I still can't play anything fast on a keyboard. I can't do that.
I don't think it's designed for that kind of really quick staccato or shreddy, solo-y type of stuff. I don't think it is.
Exactly. But if you look to the marketing videos of Rolly in the early years, you will always see virtuose keyboard players who are doing.
They had probably had Jordan Rudess there doing a million notes at once. Yeah, right. Right. I gotcha. Yeah.
And so for the first years, I always thought, okay, so this is such an instrument for these incredible virtuoses. So that's not an instrument for me. Until I went into a store and actually, I think I was waiting for something else, and I said, here's something I tried out. And I just played one chord, and then I did a little bit of that sliding and that pressure. And I was immediately sold to that thing, and I bought it the same day.
Yep.
But I had to learn that I will never become a virtuose keyboard player on the Rolly keyboard, but it's no longer needed. And I understood, if you look to, for example, classical piano music, most of the pieces are relatively fast, like doodle-doodle-doodle-doodle.
Yeah.
Why is it like that? Because the only way how you can change something is by attacking it. If you want to have a progression of things, you need to have repeated notes, or you have to have a lot of notes. And because otherwise you can't get into that expression thing. But here you can simply make one chord or the most simplistic melodies, and you can play them so expressively that it still sounds like really awesome, incredible music, but you don't need that keyboard skills, and so it's perfect for slow stuff.
Yeah. Look, I still remember there was a concept piano, and it's probably from the 70s or 80s, where it had like a little lip at the end of the key, and you'd press it and then you can pull it and it would pitch bend. It was I can't remember the name of that controller. It didn't get to market, I don't think, but it was you can picture it, so you've got like a normal key press, but there was a lip at the end of the keyboard, so that you say you're pressing down and you hit the chord, and then you can grab your thumb and pull down on the key, and it would actually pitch bend. It was probably similar to, was it pitch bending? I think it was. But then you see, it's kind of almost like Aftertouch as well. But there was a concept keyboard where you'd play the key, and then you could actually pull the key in and out for modulation, if you know what I mean, right?
Yeah. And nowadays you have the Osmose, which is really, really incredible instrument because you can have that classical piano or keyboard playing styles, maybe not piano because it doesn't have that kind of hammer attack feeling, but it feels like a normal synth keypad, like a high quality one, but you can play vibrato. You can have this incredible, sensitive, polyphonic aftertouch.
Is that a Rolly instrument as well?
No, it's by Expressive E.
Right, okay.
Which is a French manufacturer, and they focus on expressive instruments and also expressive synthesizers. And they have perfected that idea of an MPE controller. So,
sorry, and what's it called again?
Osmose.
I'll have to check this out.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's incredible. So last week, someone visited me here to try it out. He is a guitar player and keyboard player, but for the last 2 years, he was a little bit staying away from the keyboard because he felt, keyboard, it's not so expressive. And with a guitar, I can make that glides, I can make that vibrato. It's so much more expressive. So I invited him to try the Osmose, and I think he spent something like half an hour to play 500 ways of different vibratos.
Yeah.
And he always said, I'm sold. I'm sold. Wow, damn, this is so good. Okay, I'm sold. So yeah, it's really amazing.
Yeah, that's awesome. And look, I think, there's definitely going to be some interesting things coming out, not only with the MPE, but also with the MIDI 2. And it's a shame that Pete is not here because, he's the chair of the MIDI 2 board and he's in charge of that MIDI 2 implementation over at Microsoft, or he's part of the team there. Now, just one other real quick question, which would have been Pete's question, but you've probably already answered it. Are you using custom libraries, frameworks, or are you using more accessible frameworks like Juice? And I think you've already answered that question.
Yeah, I'm using Juice.
Yep.
And almost nothing else. So there's a Meth library that I'm using sometimes for the more advanced matrix stuff, which is highly optimized. And but basically that's it. And I'm trying to avoid to create tons of dependencies to other software libraries because that's always a risk for the future of that plugin. And I think it is important when people purchase a plugin, they also want to have it work for a couple of years. So there may be some changes, like there's suddenly Apple Silicon and whatever. And if you have tons of libraries, it makes that transition process to a new technology somewhere between incredible hard or impossible. And so I try to avoid it.
Yeah, no, of course. And I think that's that's the beauty of what Jules has created with Juice. Yes. And, we were kind of estimating the number of plugins and virtual instruments that are made in Juice, and it's above 90%. We don't know the exact number, but it's probably above 95%. So that's an amazing tool for developers that Jules has created there. And I think that if you are new to developing instruments, if you're not using Juice, you're probably just going to make it a lot harder for yourself, I would suspect. And this is coming from someone who's not a code guy, but from my understanding is that the package is there. And it's easy to use for the code guys. It's easy to use. It's easy to actually then port to all the different platforms, including mobile. It's pretty amazing. And he's also got C major as well, which is going to be another step. But then we're taking off into the past show. So you've just signed off on Myth. You obviously got some ideas for the next one, or you don't, and obviously you can't really tell us if it's.
Hopefully, it's this harmony timbre concept.
Yeah, there's a couple of things that I have in mind, and I'm happy to talk about it. The only thing is, if along the way I suddenly have a different idea, and I find that idea so promising that I want to make a switch to that idea, I will do so. That's what I really enjoy of being an independent one-person plugin maker, that I have that freedom. So when I talk about something that I want to do, there's no guarantee that I actually going to do it soon.
Yep.
And then just leave it at that you have several ideas and they're not 100% formalized yet, and you could be shifting stream at any moment. So there you go.
Exactly.
Yeah. I want to just real quickly, just your relationship and association with the team at Traction, because this is how my whole synchronicity of getting both you and Jules on.
Yeah.
So what's the relationship there? So you're the sole developer and coder for the plugins, and Traction. The team at Traction are your distributors?
Exactly.
Yeah.
This is how it is. So when I started thinking about creating Dawesome, and I came from a job where for 10 years I was manager and had large teams of couple of hundreds of people. And one thing that was clear for me is I really enjoy really doing that stuff, like being creative, crafting something, coding something, and at the end, there is something. The most important thing for me is I never want Dawesome to become something where I end up being a manager again and other people are doing the interesting stuff.
Right.
And so at that time, I read about these tiny houses movement, and I said, that's great. But I don't need a tiny house. What I need is a tiny business. So I thought about, okay, how can I create a business where everything is done in such a way that I can do it as a single person, and also for a long time. Not only that I can start it as a single person, but that I can continue to do it for a longer time. One thing is doing collaborations, but another thing is I want to really cherry pick the things that I love and where I think I'm good at, and that is creating plugins, creating instruments. That's, I think, what I can do very well. And for everything else, I want other people to take care for. And then Traction, they already had very interesting instruments that were a little bit against the mainstream, like that Biotech and Wave Razor. And so for me, they already had kind of a reputation as one of the more innovative plugin makers. And they announced that they have this program called Traction Presence, where they act like a record company acts for a musician. So they take care for the distribution, they take care for the marketing and everything. And for me, that's a perfect split. So I can focus on the things that I love to do, and they can do all the stuff that I don't love to do.
Yeah. Perfect. Absolutely. Yeah. Now, Dawesome Village. So this is your online community for end users and contributors. So I suppose you can either of you actually give me a little bit of a rundown on that, because I know that you're part of that community, Erin, and Peter. Yeah, can you start off with?
Yes.
Yeah, go.
So maybe I can explain how it came to happen. So initially, I had to look for beta testers. Nobody knows that I exist. And so I reached out to people in forums and said, hey, I want to publish a plugin, and who is interested in beta testing? It was very, very difficult in the very beginning to find beta testers. And after I had my first plugin, there were more people that were interested. And over time, I had a group of really awesome people who are quite varied and who help me with the beta testing, and they come up with a lot of ideas, proposals, and whatever. But I managed this by writing mails back and forth, and I reached a point where that was no longer working, because I had to explain the same thing again and again and again. And I thought it would be much better to create a community, because I thought, damn, these people should talk to each other, not only because of Dawesome, because as very often I link people, like someone said, and I'm currently working on this and this idea. And I said, hey, I know someone else who, by coincidence, is a bass player who also does contact microphone recordings. I can connect the two of you. And so I decided to move the beta group to a Discord server. I was new to Discord and was a little bit strange and bewildering to me in the very beginning, but it worked out quite nicely. And it was very interesting to see how this group of people immediately bonded with each other, and they started making jokes. They started just to check in. Hey guys, how are you doing? Blah, blah, blah. So it was no longer focusing only about being a beta tester. They shared what they are working. They shared interesting videos and everything. And so something like a year ago, I thought, hey, maybe I should just open it to the public, because there are probably also a lot of people who are not interested in being a beta tester, but who would still be interested in having the conversations. And I find some of the forums that exist for people who are interested in synth music a little bit, how to say, unfriendly. There are some people who are always spreading that kind of negativity. And I thought, well, I would like to have such a place where everyone is friendly and supportive to the others, and where if you're an absolute beginner and say, oh, I don't have a clue about what is a plugin, and I always read that DAW, what is it, and how to do it. These people shouldn't be laughed off, right? We all had been at that point earlier,
Absolutely.
20 years ago or whenever. And it can be quite intimidating at the very beginning. So why should not reach out to these people and say, hey, we can give you a helping hand. Here's an intro video that you might enjoy, and blah, blah, blah.
That's what the initial forums, the community vibe was like, but it quickly descended it like the Wild West.
Yeah.
in the early 2000s. And forums now, there's not that many left that have a lot of activity, but you just have to learn to avoid the trolls. I call it, the pigeon. I call it the pigeon chess. You just don't engage in the pigeon chess. And there's just people there that purposely go to these forums. They're always under an anonymous username. They'll never reveal who they are, and they're just there to disrupt shit. That's their whole vibe. I don't know. I don't know why, but that's something that I've experienced for decades, and we had a bit of a laugh with Jules about the fantastic vibe that is over at some of the forums that that the traction guys are participating in. Look, that's just the whole thing. It's just a community. Things get tribal, but if you've got a community where people are not getting stomped on, and they're looking after each other and sharing experiences and stuff. That's what I used to love about forums.
Yeah, exactly.
I still participate in some, but I just refuse to engage in pigeon chess, as I call it.
Exactly.
I just refuse to engage, especially, you get the newly registered account which is immediately negative and attempting to create division. And I'm thinking it's just another sock puppet account. He's probably got 10 or 15 different aliases there, and he's just sitting there layering shit upon shit because they've got nothing better to do in their lives, So but it's good that you've created a community where I bet you if something like that started, the rest of the community would stomp on it very quickly, So that's a good thing, Peter.
Yeah, the idea was, first of all, we try to role model that kind of behavior that we want to see.
Yep.
And we thought if we take care, so there are a few moderators who also help, and when there is something that goes into the wrong direction, they reach out to that person and say, hey, maybe calm down a bit, or whatever.
Yeah.
And if you are in a place like that Dawesome village, when you see all the others are behaving in a friendly way and they're sharing their stuff, then in a natural way, you are driven to also do the same. And I think this is how it works and why this is such a friendly and supportive community.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Definitely.
Now, just real quickly, and you don't have to answer this, and it can be short or it could be, as detailed as you want. But do you have any thoughts on the current state of music technology and the future developments in that area?
Yeah, I think that's a interesting question, and I have part of an answer, but not the perfect one. So I'm still also with a big question mark. So of course, these recent changes with AI were a little bit jaw-dropping.
Yep.
There's still, of course, in terms of tone quality, it's a little bit like a badly compressed MP3.
Yeah.
But in terms of composition, I was blown away.
Yeah.
So it's amazing. And also phrasing and how it takes your lyrics and how it makes music which is coherent to the lyrics, it's quite amazing.
Yeah.
Just that I don't believe that the way how the technology is used right now is the one which is going to be the future of it. No one is going to sit there and prompt something which is then going to be the next hit in the charts. Maybe that will happen once or twice, but this is not going to be the new workflow.
Yeah.
But when I think of instruments, for example, right now, when you, let's say, think of you want to make an orchestral mock-up and you have a keyboard. So you make a sloppy playing of, let's say, a bassoon line. And an AI could take that line. It would see, okay, he intended to play a D, then an F sharp, then a G, and then a legato transition to a B flat. And then make it like that bassoon passage would have really been played by an expressive, skillful musician. That would be a game changer, where I think this kind of technology that right now is aware of phrasing, which is aware of musical intensities and stuff like that, could really be a game changer, because it would make that workflow so much easier. Instead of creating 500 automation lanes to get that expressivity back into your samples, something that behaves like a musician, that would be really awesome.
Yeah, but also like applying kind of the expressiveness of like acoustic instruments onto new sounds as well.
Yeah.
And creating completely new things. That's what I'm really interested in, what it could do.
Or take the expressivity of a field recording. You go out with your field recorder, you capture the wind in the trees, and then you put that onto a cello sound, and you get the same movement there. So there's a lot of possibilities.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Look, I think some of the recent stuff with the AI, and we discussed it a bit in the last show and in the last show before, and I've been discussing it with Erin almost daily. It is. Look, I'm quite disturbed by it, only because there's no ethic. There seems to be a lack of ethic with these companies that are actually creating these AI-driven songs that are, for a lot of people, good enough that they wouldn't care whether it was generated by a human or not. And so, the simple discussion is things like library music, or simple things like for ads, or just people that are even needing some background music songs for smaller productions, whether it's a movie or a documentary or whatever. That area of music for the musicians, I think that's gone. And there's a huge ethical question on that one, because
it's going to disrupt whole industries.
Yeah, the companies that are actually generating these, they don't give a shit about musicians. They're not even creatives. They're there for, they're all venture capitalists, funded massive kind of operations. There's huge investment being placed in these, and they want a return on the investment. They don't give a shit. We were watching a video where one European guy on YouTube was quite funny. He was just kind of losing his shit on it this week when he's saying, he goes, well, I signed up to one of these and because the free demo had kind of expired or something, so he signed up to one of these subscriptions for $10 for the month, and that gave him 500 songs, and then he generated a song from a prompt that he could probably give to a client. He says, and that cost me, what was it, Erin? 2 cents. Right?
Something like that, yeah.
And it took 3 minutes to generate this song where you'd go, shit, that is pretty much good enough for whatever. And there's also, again, we're going down a rabbit warren, but there's things like, some of the, let's call them streaming platforms that are already unethically and allegedly, I'm going to use the word allegedly unethically creating forks, artists, right? And they're in their recommended playlists, right? There's an artist with a song that's generating these massive amounts of plays, right? Streams. And then someone investigated and found that the same song, exactly the same song, is under 40 different artist names and under 40 different song titles, right? So, and those songs are getting pushed into the recommended streams by this streaming place saying, okay, I want pop rock or R&B pop, and 40 different songs from 40 different artists. What a load of crap. They've just generated it via AI, and they're pulling the stream revenue away from the real artists, right? Because they're flooding the streams with these AI-generated artists that don't exist. And one of the points was that, there's again, I'm just paraphrasing, but there's some guy, and I think it was in Sweden, that had, I can't remember, it was billions of streams on one of the streaming platforms, who I'm not going to name because it's all alleged, right? But so the one of the songs of this artist that doesn't exist, because apparently he had like 400 aliases, right? And he, like, one particular song had millions of streams on a streaming platform, and the same song on YouTube had like 100. It's like, come on, give me a break. So someone's gilding the lily there. I think, if is that the term, they're scamming the game. They have to be. Did you get to that part of the interview, Erin? Did you watch that one? You know which one I'm talking about?
I don't think I got to the end of it.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's like several people have just said that the streaming platforms will have no problem actually creating virtual artists in the particular style of whatever people want to listen to, and they own the rights to these virtual artists and the virtual songs, and they won't be needing to pay any royalties to any real people, because they've created whole playlists, right, within a particular genre. And a lot of people wouldn't be able to care less.
But then, interestingly, kind of the flip side of that is that some of this technology will allow people to create completely unique sounds and music that AI won't necessarily be able to create by itself, because it has no context.
Yeah, there has to be a positive and a light at the end of the tunnel, and we humans have to take it back from the robots. We have to, we just we have to. The creative element has to kind of win out on this. Otherwise,
I'm sure it will.
Yeah,
I hope, but a lot of people it's going to hurt a lot of people. Yep. There's no doubt about that.
Oh yeah.
Which isn't good.
No.
Yeah, I agree, and I think there's also one positive. There may be one positive element. Sometimes you need something like that, like a wake-up call, to really understand what you are about to lose, and then it making that thing much stronger. So here, I think right now it becomes so easy to create something which sounds like a track in the style of XYZ. Then first you're shocked because you think, well, so what is it? what is it an artist and stuff like that? If that machine can use some advanced statistics and create something like that. But I think an artist is so much more, and people don't want to listen to that music, and they can't connect to that thing. And I think there's a good precedence, and that is computer chess. When there was that computer chess game where that I think it was Kasparov was losing against that chess computer. Also, people said, well, people will lose their interest in playing chess if chess is dominated by computers, and there's no longer going to be that real chess masters and stuff like that. And what happened? Nowadays, there are more people interested in chess and having chess as a hobby as ever before in history. Almost no one is interested in watching computer chess games. Everyone is raving about these master chess players. Magnus Carlsen is kind of a pop star in that chess game, because people realize the qualities that chess has is one person against another person. And that's not the same like one computer against another computer.
Yeah.
And I think the same is for the music. There may be a few AI songs, and because AI is fresh, they will get a lot of attention, but this is going to be very short. And afterwards, people will say, yeah, well, but it's not only about the songs, it's about the artist.
Yeah,
it's about
100%.
the live show. It's about all that thing that surrounds.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah, I agree too.
It's almost like, for me, the genre of music that I listen to, it's not being impacted by this. It simply isn't. All right, so with the bands and the musicians, because I listen to a lot of jazz fusion or prog fusion, prog metal, a lot of commercial hard rock stuff. I know who's actually creating this stuff. I know who's creating it. Now, are they computers controlled in the production of some of it? Of course, but there's still a human element to the style of music that I listen to. With the pop stuff, it's a little bit harder. But then again, some of the guitar-driven stuff that I've listened to on some of those song creations things, they were like, wow, that's kind of getting there. But it still comes down to a personal thing that we as creative artists, we choose who we listen to and who we support. And I hope that continues, because we can't completely remove the human element. It's just, it's not. And you're not going to go sit there and watch a virtual concert, are you? Well, then again,
Well, why would you?
With the holograms, hang on, where they're already doing it. So I've got to be careful where I step there.
It would be a niche or something. But yeah, it's an interesting one.
Yep.
I think probably what I kind of suspect is that it's going to push things back further for people being even more creative and being more unique, and not trying to kind of follow certain, kind of genres and styles so much, and more focus on actually developing themselves as an artist.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, one point that I was watching, I haven't finished watching that interview, but one of the points that the guy was making was that they simplified music to the point where it was almost, it was not putting people to sleep, but they'd simplified the actual creation of the song structures and chord progressions and all of that type of stuff, where it was becoming very mundane, and that's why the AI stuff was easy to get or pick up that kind of style and generate stuff. And maybe it's going to push people into listening and creating more complex musical stuff. That's not for everyone, but that's my style of music that I actually prefer to listen to, is something that's more complex, and not always, but that's the stuff that I've always been drawn to, and it's the last kind of bastion, I suppose, at the moment, that hasn't really been flooded. But yeah, we'll see where all the dust lands with that one as well. Guys, I think we could probably wrap this up now, because we've been going for It's quite a while.
Long.
So let's wrap this up. Thank you to both of you guys for your time and energy today. That has been awesome. We've covered an enormous amount of ground. We've gone down some rabbit warrens I wasn't expecting to, which has been great. So thanks again, guys. And I think with that one, on to the next.